Before we begin, I'd just like to mention that while I will try to cover most of the important rules of the game, this will not be a fully comprehensive tutorial but is rather meant to introduce the most important aspects for you to be able to start a game as soon as possible. If you have any questions or if you find any mistakes, please leave them in the comments and I'll address them as soon as I can. And if there are games you want to see a skip the tutorial video for, you can mention them in the comments as well. The following tutorial utilizes clips recorded from the PC version of the base game of Anno 1800. The game was developed by Blue Byte and published by Ubisoft. Anno 1800 is a real-time city-building strategy game set at the dawn of the Industrial Age. During the game, you will attract population to work in different production buildings to produce different resources that will attract more and higher-level population to work in higher-level production buildings to produce higher-level resources. You get the point. A huge part of the game is managing and striving to gain different resources, making sure that you always have enough to provide your population's needs and to progress your cities further. Each resource will play several roles in progressing your cities, but not all will be easily accessible. Some resources are specific to other islands where you'll need to establish a new city in order to harvest them and share them between your islands. You can also trade with other characters attempting to establish their own cities if they have the resources that you need. The game doesn't really have goals or victory conditions. Being a sandbox game, you make your own goals, whether to create the most efficient production lines, the prettiest, most organized cities, or both. However, I want to mention that when starting a custom game from the main menu, you have the option of turning on victory conditions, which will have you and other characters race toward a certain goal, or even several of them. As mentioned, Anno 1800 is a real-time game, meaning things will always continue to move and progress on their own whether you do something or not. However, there are options to change the game's speed here on the upper right side of the screen. You can slow down time to allow yourself to plan layouts for structures, and you can speed the game up when you're simply waiting for progress. There is an option to pause the game if you need it, but doing so pauses your ability to do anything in the game as well. You start the game at a random island with a flagship and a trading post. You utilize ships to explore the world, interact with other characters, and transport resources from one place to another. I'll explain each of these functions in more detail later in the video. Trading posts, on the other hand, represent ownership of an island and store an island's starting and eventually surplus resources. In this case, by clicking on the trading post, we see that we start with these resources. Important building resources available in the trading post can also be found here at the top center of the screen. You can change this to other resources as well depending on what's relevant to you at the moment. One of the unique traits of Anno 1800 is that everything is tightly interconnected and interwoven. Each piece of the puzzle is crucial to the overall picture for the whole infrastructure to perform. You need population for buildings, for resources for population, and so on. To better explain that idea, let's play through this scenario. Fortunately for us, we do start with several resources. The first thing we want is to have population, so we'll have people to work on production buildings we construct. This is where residential buildings come in. These are buildings that are required to attract certain types of populations to your city. At the start of the game, the only available residential building is the farmer residence. Different types of residence buildings attract different types of population. The farmer residence, for instance, can only accommodate, well, farmers. How we'll attract other types of population we'll get to later in the video. For now, let's construct several farmer residences. To do so, we can click the option here at the bottom of our screen in the construction menu, and simply choose the location where we'd like to place our residential buildings. Here, we'll also find other structures that are available for construction. We don't have a lot of options yet, but this will continue to expand as the game goes on. By hovering our cursor over each one, we'll find a description of their function, the number of each we currently have on the island, their maintenance costs, if any, and their construction costs. Some of them might still be grayed out, needing prerequisites to be met before they can be constructed. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. The small warehouse accepts and distributes goods to and from production buildings. We'll expand on warehouses further in a bit. We currently have 0 small warehouses on the island. This building costs $50 per in-game minute to maintain, and $500 and 10 timber to construct. By the way, you can find your current money here on the upper left side of the screen. As we can see, we should be able to construct a small warehouse. The fishery, on the other hand, is grayed out. By hovering our cursor, we can see that we need 50 farmers on the island first for the building to become available. Take note that you can also find construction options here. This is where you can drag buildings to make it easier to find them when you're planning to build a lot. Continuing with our scenario, we can see that there are icons appearing on top of our residential buildings. These are notifications that inform us that this building isn't functioning as intended for some reason. By hovering our cursor over the building, we'll see that, in this case, we are missing an important prerequisite for the building to function, a road to the harbor or trading post. We'll tackle other similar notifications in a later chapter. Every building on an island needs to have a road that connects them to the trading post for them to function. For residential buildings, it's so arriving population has a path to their new homes and to their designated workplaces. For production buildings, it's so required resources can be provided and produced resources can be transferred or stored. To build a road, simply click on the option on the construction menu and drag your cursor through the grid. Buildings not connected to the trading post don't provide any use, and they also suffer attrition, eventually breaking down and needing to be renovated. So make sure you make roads a priority immediately after constructing a new building. Now we have population coming into our island. Here on the top center of the screen, we'll find the different types of population available, and the number of each population available for jobs. In order to gain population faster and maintain them, we'll need to fulfill their needs and keep them contented. By clicking on a residential building, we'll find the relevant information. Aside from the current and maximum number of population for this household, we'll also find their needs, their happiness level, where the happiness level comes from, and their wants. Let's start with their needs. A household's needs have levels of priority. In this case, we can see they have 3 needs, but they need a market more than anything else at the moment. When a household's needs aren't met, people will move out, and you can immediately check this with the status icon here. In this case, we can see that the number of residents in this household is decreasing, so we should construct a market as soon as we can. Like everything else, in order to provide a household's needs, they need to be connected to the relevant building with a road. In addition, some needs require close proximity to a household for it to be of use to them. For example, if we're to construct a market far from the residential buildings, we can see that it doesn't fully supply their need. But if we were to move it closer, we can see that the need is fully supplied and the household's population is now increasing. To check a building's range, when constructing it, the affected roads will be highlighted in green. The further allocation, the lighter the shade becomes, meaning the less effective the building is at supplying these parts. Now that we've acquired population and have stabilized them by meeting their basic need, it's time to utilize them by constructing production buildings in need of farmers. We're also doing this to make sure we don't run out of resources for expansion. Another important aspect of the game is managing your resources. You never want to be in a situation where you don't have enough of what you need that you have no way of acquiring. We currently have the timber production chain available. I don't mean to be repetitive about the interconnectedness of everything in the game, but here, once again, we have a production building in need of a resource from a different production building. Different types of buildings have different requirements to produce. To give a couple of examples, the fishery requires to be constructed on a harbor, and the potato farm requires potato fields to be constructed close to and around them. Going back, the lumberjack's hut requires a certain range around it to be free of obstacles for it to be efficient. As we can see, if we were to construct it around these buildings, its efficiency is significantly lowered versus the area over here. The lumberjack hut also requires trees, but it can plant its own source of trees as indicated here, as long as there are spaces around it that are available. The sawmill, on the other hand, simply requires wood for it to produce timber. There are a couple of ways to supply a resource to a production building. The first way is to construct a small warehouse. Warehouses act like outposts for your trading post. Resources available in a trading post are also available in all warehouses, and any resource deposited in either becomes available in both locations as well. So in a situation where a resource needed by a production building was constructed elsewhere, having warehouses or the trading posts in close proximity to both will still allow the transfer process to take place. But take note, like providing needs to residential buildings, resource buildings need to be within range of a warehouse for their products to be delivered. The second way is to have production buildings from the same production chain in close proximity to each other. This is so that when a resource is produced, it doesn't need to be delivered to a warehouse, but will immediately be delivered to the production building that needs it. Take note that production buildings can only store a limited amount of the resource type they are producing. Once the limit has been reached, the building will stop producing, slowing down your city's efficiency. So in this case, it would be recommended to place a warehouse near the sawmill, so any excess timber produced can be immediately stored, vacating the sawmill storage, allowing it to continuously produce its resource. Planning layouts for efficient production chains is another aspect of the game. The faster resources can be produced and delivered, the faster your city will grow, and the less likely it is for your city to suffer deficiencies and imbalances. As an example, here in one of my earlier games, I set up this layout for the Schnapp's production chain so that every essential building is beside one another, completing deliveries much faster. To help with planning the layout of your production chains, or even your cities, the game has a blueprint mode that can be activated here on the bottom right side of the screen. This will allow you to plan layouts without spending resources, regardless of whether they are available or not. There are also other tools here in the construction menu that will help with your layouts. These buttons will allow you to relocate and copy groups of already constructed buildings to move or construct them elsewhere. And this button will allow you to demolish buildings and roads with a partial refund if you want to make changes or if you have structures that you no longer need. But as I mentioned earlier, if you didn't set a victory condition, you can just set your own goals, so efficient layouts don't have to be necessary. An important thing I'd like to discuss is income. Here, on the upper left side of the screen, you'll find the balance of your upkeep and income. And by hovering our cursor, we'll see where the number comes from. It's important to always keep this number positive. A negative number will deplete your coin supply, and if you ever reach negative $5,000, you'll immediately lose the game. There are several ways to earn income, but the most important one in the earlier parts of the game relates to your population. You earn money from your population by providing their needs. By clicking the marketplace, we see that this is where your population gets the majority of their needs. You have to make sure that you always have a steady supply of these resources for your population to purchase. By clicking on a residential building, we'll see down here how much money we're getting from this household through the provisions. And the more needs you provide, the higher the income you'll receive from each household. Once again, showcasing how tight the economy in the game is, if for instance you don't have enough fish to provide your population, they will become unhappy, prompting them to work inefficiently, slowing down the production of your buildings. Also, potentially decreasing the income you're getting from those resources. And take note, as mentioned earlier, population can also decrease if you're not providing their needs, also lowering your income. So in the earlier parts of the game, you have to make sure you have just the right amount of population, enough to work your production buildings, and enough that you can properly supply their needs. Too much or too little population can be detrimental to your island's progress. There are a lot of other ways to earn both income and money throughout the game, but we'll tackle those later when they become relevant. Ideally, you'd want a lot of population and you'd want them to be as happy as possible, which can increase the efficiency of production buildings and income. To check your population's happiness, you can click on a residential building and the Happiness tab. Here, you'll find the different factors that affect a population's happiness, which you can use to infer on how to improve their happiness. By hovering your cursor over each section, you'll see their disposition with each relevant aspect. I won't go over all these anymore as they are pretty self-explanatory, with some we'll be able to tackle later on, but I'd like to focus on working conditions. Sometimes you'll find yourself either missing or having too much of certain resources. In these cases, you might want to force the increase or decrease of the production's efficiency. You can do so by clicking on a production building and clicking here to adjust working conditions. Here, you can choose the production you'd like to adjust. Moving the slider to the right will force the population assigned in the relevant building to work harder. However, as we can see here, doing this will decrease the happiness of your population. On the other hand, if you have too much of a resource, you can go the other way and move the slider to the left, decreasing the efficiency instead, which in turn will increase the happiness of your population. Having a contented population can have several benefits such as increased efficiency, increased city attractiveness through festivals, less undesirable events, and more quests that provide different rewards, all of which we'll be able to tackle in later chapters. Another way of managing your population and resources is to stagnate your population's growth by keeping them from consuming specific resources. This can be useful when there are certain imbalances or crises in your cities that you'd like to figure out and resolve first before allowing more population to come in. This can also be a way to manage your resources if your city is suffering from deficiencies. By clicking on a marketplace, you can pause the distribution of a specific resource to your population. You can do the same thing by clicking on any household and clicking pause on any resource you'd like them to stop consuming. We've already discussed how to attract and manage population. But now, let's discuss how to upgrade them. When a household reaches a certain number of population, the upgrade option becomes available here. This upgrades the residential building to the next level of population, which will unlock new buildings and functions for your island. But before we get into that, let's take a look at how we actually increase a household's residents. Simply enough, you just need to provide all of their needs from both tabs. And in addition, they also have lifestyle needs which can be found here. While lifestyle needs are optional, providing these can further increase the number of population living in a household. Once we're able to reach the required number of residents, we can click this button. And now, as we can see, we have a new type of population. They have new needs that should be provided, and we have new construction options as well. Take note that you can downgrade a residential building as well if you ever need or want to do so. Aside from residential buildings, there are other types of buildings that can be upgraded as well. For example, your warehouses can be upgraded to increase both their storage capacity and efficiency in collecting and supplying deliveries. I won't go over all of the buildings that you can upgrade, but you should be able to tell which ones can be upgraded if they have this option. Influence is a special resource you'll find here on the upper left side of the screen. And by hovering our cursor on our influence, we'll see where the number comes from. Increasing our influence is simple. We just need to increase our population. And by clicking on our influence, we'll be able to see where our influence is being spent. By clicking these options, we can see a more specific breakdown of which spending fits in which category. Spending influence has its benefits too. By clicking the arrow here and moving to the next page, we'll be able to see bonuses that we've unlocked and bonuses we can acquire by spending influence in the corresponding categories. I won't go over each of the categories where influence can be spent, but we should be able to tackle a few later when they become relevant. But for now, I'd like to explain how to use propaganda. Every few in-game days, you'll receive a notification from your journalist who publishes your island's newspaper. In the newspaper will be factual stories about your progress, your actions, and any major events that might be relevant to your cities. These stories will affect your population in different ways, both positive and negative. For example, in this scenario, it seems like I haven't been able to supply enough beer to one of my islands. If published in its current state, my populations will start consuming more resources for a short period. Before going to print, you'll have the chance to change these stories to have some control over what information your population will receive and a corresponding benefit. Here, at the bottom of the screen, you'll find the options along with their influence cost and their effect on the population. By hovering our cursor on these effects, we'll be able to see a description of each. The number of options here increases as your population increases. Once we've decided which propaganda we'd like to publish, we simply drag it over the news article we'd like to change. Take note that constant use of propaganda may lower your population's happiness and may cause riots to erupt in your cities. Throughout the game, you'll receive notifications from different sources that will provide different benefits and penalties depending on whether you choose to attend to them or not. On the left side of the screen here, you'll find the different types of notifications you might receive. The quest book collects all ongoing quests you've accepted from other characters or your population. We'll explain how to get quests from other characters in a bit, but for your population, once in a while, you'll see a star on the map on one of your islands. This represents your people asking for a favor. By finding this star on your island and clicking on the person or people under the star, you'll be provided with a quest that you can choose to accept or decline. There are different types of quests you can get from your population, but I will no longer explain them as they are pretty simple, such as taking a photo or locating a specific entity on your island. The rewards of these quests can also vary from money, items which we will explain later, and so on. The next category we'll find here on the left side of the screen are the newspapers, which we've already explained, expeditions, which we'll explain in a later chapter, events in your island, general notifications such as issues in your cities, which you can click to immediately go to the relevant location, and warnings such as if your ships are under attack. One of these I'd like to explain further is when there are problems in your cities. Once in a while, your cities can suffer from unpredictable emergencies such as fires, riots, and diseases. These events will need to be resolved to prevent damage to your cities. This is where emergency service buildings come in, such as fire stations, police stations, and so on. It is recommended to have multiple of these buildings covering all of your buildings to prevent these emergencies from becoming a problem. Now that we have a handle on managing our island, it's time to journey afar. Well, not really. At least not yet. At the start of the game, you're given a random island on a map full of them veiled by fog, which you'll need to explore using ships to view what is being concealed. When exploring in the earlier parts of the game, you're generally looking for two things: other characters and new islands to settle, both of which we'll explain later. There are different types of ships in the game, each with its own advantages. But to construct ships, first, you'll need the required resources as usual, and you'll need the shipyard. The shipyard is one of the buildings you'll eventually unlock as your city progresses. Here in the shipyard, you'll find the different ships you can construct, and by hovering our cursor, we'll see the stats and the construction costs of each type. Cargo slots represent the number of resource types a ship can carry. Item slots we'll explain a bit later. Take note that some ships have damage, which means they can be useful in battles, but some do not. Ships can be assigned to different tasks, most of which we should be able to explain a bit later. When you already have a lot of ships doing different tasks, down here on the construction screen, you can see which ships are doing what. You can also group ships together and assign them a number, so it'll be easier to find them by simply pressing the number on your keyboard. You can select multiple ships and press Ctrl on your keyboard plus a number, or you can simply drag them to the fleet you'd like to add them to. You can also use ships to earn a quick buck by selling them to Sir Archibald Blake, one of the characters you'll meet in the game. To sell a ship to him, simply bring the ship to his harbor, click on the ship, and this button here becomes available. And after pressing it, Sir Archibald Blake will make you an offer that you can accept or refuse. As mentioned earlier, when exploring the map, you'll find and meet other characters. These are people who are also trying to create and progress their cities in the game. And there are many different ways you can interact with them. Using one of my previous games as an example, once you've explored the map and met all the characters, here on the lower left side of the screen, you can open the diplomacy screen. And here, you'll find your relationship status with each character. War will allow you and other characters to attack each other. We'll explain war further in a later chapter. Peace simply means you cannot attack each other. Trade rights mean you can start trading with a character, which we will also explain later. Alliance allows trades and will have you support each other if one of you ever goes to war. By clicking on a character, you'll see their military and economy strength compared to yours. Here, you'll also find different interaction options to increase or decrease your reputation with them. Reputation represents how much a character likes you. The higher the reputation, the higher the chances that they will accept offers and treaties from you. By hovering our cursor on the interaction options, we'll see what outcome it will provide if successful, the chances they will accept if relevant, and the duration of a treaty if relevant as well. By clicking their icons here, you can also see their relationship with other characters. Once you reach the trade rights status with a character, you can start trading with them. There are two ways to trade with other characters. The first is by doing it manually. By clicking on a character's trading post, you'll see what resources they have to offer and what resources they are looking for. If there's anything you'd like to buy or sell, you can stock up a ship by bringing them to your harbor, clicking this icon, and choosing the items you'd like to bring. Or, you can also click your trading post and drag the items you want to trade to the nearby ship. Then, you bring the ship to the other character's trading post, click it, click on any item, and you'll be presented with this window where you can arrange the trade. The second way of trading with other characters is by doing it somewhat automatically. When you click on your trading post, and then on a resource you'd like to trade, you can set a minimum and or maximum limit for the amount of resource you'd like to store. If you have more than the maximum limit, the excess items will be sold to any character you have trade rights with who are willing to purchase. If you have less than your minimum limit, your ships can purchase them from other characters through trade routes, which we will explain in a bit. Trading is an easy way to gain a little bit of extra cash if you have excess. It is also a good way of acquiring resources you don't have yet or have enough of. Before we move on, I'd like to mention some other interactions you can perform with characters. The first are quests, which are tasks that the other characters will ask from you in exchange for money, resources, or items, which we haven't gotten to yet. On the map, you'll sometimes see these stars. By clicking on the ship or structure with the star icon on top, you'll be offered the quest and you'll be able to see the rewards for the quest. If you have multiple quests, you can check your ongoing quests here on the left side of the screen in the quest book, as mentioned earlier. Sometimes, characters will also automatically send you quests or trade offers which will appear on the upper right side of the screen. You can still choose to accept or decline whatever it is they are asking, but take note that declining a character request usually affects and lowers your reputation with them. Another way to interact with other characters is to buy shares of their islands. This is another way to earn passive income or even take over another character's island. To buy or sell an island's share, you can go to the relevant island and click the pie chart here at the top of the screen. By hovering your cursor over each share, you can see how much money and influence you'll need to pay to acquire a share, and how much income you'll gain from the share. Once you own all 5 shares of an island, you immediately become its owner and gain control of it. You can also sell shares of your island for some quick cash, but take note that this decreases your income. To do so, you can go to one of your islands and click the same pie chart. You can choose a share and click on it to sell it. Take note that there is a 10-minute cooldown to buying an island share and taking over islands. Another way to gain shares or take over an island is by going to war with them. You can declare war with another character by choosing the interaction option in the diplomacy screen. Once you're in a war with another player, you can destroy their ships and send fleets to their islands to attack their structures and initiate a siege. Other characters can also declare war on you, and you can prevent this by keeping a good reputation with them. Take note that other characters can also attack your islands, so having defenses can be important. In the construction menu, you'll find turrets that you can build around your islands to protect them from attacking fleets, and you can equip items to Harbor Master offices, which we will explain in a later chapter. There are several ways to end the war. The first is to choose the ceasefire option if it's available on the diplomacy screen. However, this option is only temporary and will depend on the opposing character's acceptance or refusal. Another option is to issue a peace treaty, but again, this will need the opposing character's acceptance. Another way to end the war is if the opposing character surrenders to you when enough damage has been done to their islands. In this case, you'll be given the option to either take over or gain shares of their island. If you choose to take over, all the remaining buildings and roads will be removed except for the trading post, so you'll start with an empty island. But if you choose to gain shares instead, you'll receive all of the island's 5 shares, but the opposing character will remain in control, only receiving a small portion of the island's income. As mentioned earlier, when exploring, one of the things you're looking for is new islands to settle on. One of the reasons for this is that not all resources will be available on every island. You can still try to buy them from other characters, but when you need a lot of them, it's better to just settle on an island that has them. When viewing an island, here on the bottom left of the screen, you'll see the resources that are available on the island. The top icons represent the resources that you will be able to plant and farm on the island, and the bottom resources are the ones you can mine. For the ones you can mine, you can click on each icon to see where the mines are so you can plan your layouts better. Once you've established a city on another island by constructing a trading post, you'll need to create trade routes to make sure your other city has a steady supply of the resource that is only available on the other. Here, on the bottom left of the screen, you'll find this button that will open the routes menu. There are also charter routes, but we'll explain that later. To create a trade route, click here. Then, you'll choose the islands the ship will go to. Let's say we wanted to make a trade route within here and here. Take note that you can make a trade route spanning more than 2 islands. Then, we choose which ships will work the route and which items and how many of each will be loaded and unloaded to which island. This is also a way to automatically trade with other characters as mentioned earlier. Once you've created a trade route, the assigned ship or ships will automatically go back and forth trading, buying, and or selling the assigned resources. But take note that since these ships will be constantly sailing around the map, they can be vulnerable to attacks from other ships owned by characters you don't have a good relationship with. This means your ships can be damaged, slowing them down, or they can even be destroyed. To prevent this, you can assign sturdier ships with cannons in trade routes so they are able to defend themselves. Or you can have other weaponized ships patrol your trade routes to keep them safe. To assign a ship to patrol a specific area, you click on an idle ship and the patrol button here. You can then click multiple points in the map that you want the ship to patrol, prompting it to sail back and forth through these locations. Aside from building ships to assign to trade routes, you can instead establish charter routes. Charter routes are like trade routes, but you won't need to build a ship to assign to the route. In charter routes, you'll be renting ships with money and influence who'll do the work for you. However, charter ships can only carry one type of resource. During the game, you receive items from different sources such as quests, expeditions which we'll explain in the next chapter, gifts, or even a purchase from other characters. There are different types of items in the game, and each of them can be slotted to a specific building or a ship to provide different bonuses. You can find and also store items in your trading posts or warehouses. And by hovering our cursor over them, we see where they can be equipped and what bonuses they provide. You can also filter the shown items by their use by clicking these buttons here. Let's take a look at an example. The chemist can be equipped to a trade union and affects these buildings. The trade union is an administration building where items can be slotted to provide different bonuses to buildings that are in range. The chemist provides 100% additional productivity to nearby connected relevant buildings and increases your rum production as well. The expedition effect we'll explain later. Items have a rarity as well, represented by the color of their background. White represents common items, green uncommon, blue rare, purple epic, and orange legendary. Common items provide minor bonuses and are easy to get, while legendary items provide major bonuses and are harder to get. You may also encounter items with no colored backgrounds. These are quest items that disappear after the relevant quest is completed. I'd also like to mention that items can be sold to other characters for money. This is a good way to earn a little extra cash, especially if you have a lot of duplicates of lower rarity items. One thing you may need to pay attention to when playing the game is your city's attractiveness. You can find the statistic here in the top of the screen. By clicking this icon, you'll find your city's attractiveness and the breakdown of where the number comes from. You can also click each category to see a short description and which buildings are contributing to the positive or negative numbers you see. Your city's attractiveness relates to tourism. Once you're able to build a public mooring, which will be unlocked eventually as your city progresses, tourists can come visit your island for increased income. The number of tourists that will visit your island depends on the city's attractiveness. The higher the attractiveness, the more tourists will come. This is also another way to gain special visitors who will appear as and act like items. To reiterate, items can be equipped to specific structures to provide different bonuses. There are two buildings you can construct later that I'd like to mention that can contribute a large amount of attractiveness to your cities: the museum and the zoo. These are cultural buildings where specific items, artifacts, and animals respectively, can be equipped for increased attractiveness. These items can be gained the same way as the other items as explained earlier, through quests and expeditions. Depending on your goal for the game, planning the building composition of your islands and setting up trade routes to segregate negative attractiveness can be helpful in maximizing your profits. As an example, in this playthrough, I made sure that this island for tourists has no buildings that generate pollution and vulgarity. Another use of ships is for expeditions. You can find available in ongoing expeditions here on the left side of the screen. As mentioned earlier, this is a way to gain different types of items. For example, an archaeological expedition, if successful, will reward you with artifacts you can place in your museum for increased city attractiveness. To initiate an expedition, choose an expedition from the list. You'll be presented with this screen, which will tell us this expedition's difficulty, what the ship needs to bring to the expedition and what challenges the ship may face, and potential rewards. Then, you'll need to assign a ship. When choosing a ship, it's important to consider its current morale. During the expedition, a ship's morale may deplete, causing you to lose your ship, ending the expedition abruptly. Once you've chosen a ship, you can equip it with items and resources from your trading post. Here, you'll need to choose items and resources that are relevant to the expedition to increase the chances of it succeeding. By hovering our cursor over the items and resources, we'll see each of their expedition effects. For this expedition, we'll need items and resources that contribute to diplomacy, hunting, and naval power, in addition to rations that the ship will need to survive the trip and prevent its crew from starving. Any food or drink will be considered as rations by default. Take note that ships have two types of slots: cargo and item slots. Cargo slots represent your ship's storage, so any type of resource or item can be slotted here. On the other hand, item slots can only be slotted with items that can only be specifically equipped to ships, which can be determined by hovering your cursor over items and looking for this line. Once you've chosen the items you'll bring, you can start the expedition, after which the assigned ship will start the journey. When you have ongoing expeditions, once in a while, you'll receive a notification like this telling you that one of your expeditions require attention. You can also find here, in your list of ongoing expeditions, a star relating to the notification. And by clicking on it, you'll be presented with a scenario that the ship has encountered and several choices on how you'd like to resolve the encounter. Any choice you make has a chance to succeed or fail, but those chances can increase if your ship is equipped with the relevant items and resources. When failing, your ship could lose morale or lose the items and resources it's carrying. Take note that you don't have to take a chance on every expedition that becomes available. When an expedition seems too difficult, you can delete it to make room for more expeditions in the future. As mentioned earlier, not all essential resources will be available on every island. In fact, some resources won't even be available on the same map. Eventually, in your game, you'll unlock another location known as the New World. You can access this here in the bottom left of the screen once it becomes available. In the New World will be new islands with new population types and new resources. But how to gain them works the same way as the others. You need to colonize a new island by building a trading post and starting a new city. To gain access to the New World once it has been unlocked, first you'll need to send a ship, and be sure to equip it with enough resources to build a trading post to start the new city. The journey will take some time as the New World is quite far, and you can check how far your ship is by opening the world map here on the lower left side of the screen. Once you've established a city in the New World, because it will need resources from the Old World and vice versa, you'll need ships to go back and forth to pick up and drop off resources. You can do this manually, or you can establish trade or charter routes. Before we end, I'd like to mention something that won't be unlocked until the later part of the game, but I think you should be aware of early so you can plan for them. Eventually, you'll be able to unlock electricity and trains. Electricity is something that can be supplied to specific buildings to significantly increase their efficiency. However, in order to do so, you'll need train tracks around your city and trains that can move around to deliver the oil, another resource, that your power plants will need to produce the electricity for their area. Train tracks are basically another type of road. They can intersect with regular roads, but they cannot overlap, so your city will need space allocated for them, especially if your electrifiable buildings are far apart from each other. When building train tracks, especially long ones, you also need a second or even more parallel tracks and some stops so your trains can freely move to and from relevant buildings without the need to stop and wait for the track to become available, as trains cannot counterflow and move through each other. As mentioned earlier, this isn't a fully comprehensive tutorial. There are a lot of aspects of the game that I either simply missed or chose to omit from this tutorial, such as things that get unlocked in the later parts of the game. Regardless, the information provided should be enough for you to be able to start a game knowing what you can do, what you'd like to do, and how you will go about doing those things. Thanks for watching.